Here's a story of a psychotic hobbit here in fan fiction titled The Forgotten Hobbit. In the rolling hills of the Shire, nestled between meadows and quiet streams, lived a hobbit named Perwin Bramblefoot. Perwin wasn't your typical hobbit. He had an ever-present sparkle in his eye and an unusual habit of muttering to himself. The villagers found it odd, but Perwin was harmless enough. He tended to a small patch of garden and would occasionally join the others at the local tavern. They always seemed a bit distant. No one knew that Perwin's world wasn't quite like theirs. His reality had begun to unravel some years ago, though the signs were subtle at first. It began one late autumn evening with a strange shadow falling across his doorstep, a figure he'd never seen before. The figure spoke in riddles, its voice distant but clear. The truth is not what you think it is. The encounter was short, fleeting, but it left Perwin unsettled. In the days that followed, he started to hear things, whispers at the edge of his hearing, voices calling his name from the woods, or perhaps from the furthest reaches of his mind. They were soft at first, like the rustling of leaves in the wind, but soon they grew louder and more insistent. Perwin found himself lost in confusion. Was it the wind, or was there someone or something out there in the dark? He'd venture out in the middle of the night to search for the source, but always found nothing. He would tell the others, but they simply patted him on the back and assured him that he was imagining things. "Just get some sleep, Perwin," they'd say. "You've been working too hard." But it didn't stop. One evening, as he was picking apples from his tree, a particularly strong voice whispered, "They're not real, none of them are." Perwin froze, his hands still on the fruit. He glanced over his shoulder, expecting to see someone there, but there was only the old oak tree, the same one that had stood in his yard for as long as he could remember. "What do you mean?" he muttered aloud, the words escaping before he could stop them. The voice, now closer, clearer, responded, "The hobbits, your friends, they are shadows of what you want them to be." Perwin stumbled back. He had to be hearing things. The trees, the ground beneath his feet, they all seemed to sway, like a distant dream pulling him under. The sky turned an eerie shade of purple, and the very air felt thick, suffocating. His breathing quickened, and his heart raced. The next day, Perwin began to doubt everything. The world around him didn't seem quite right. His neighbors, his friends, even his family, they all looked different somehow. Their faces were too smooth, too perfect, as if they weren't entirely real. He would catch them staring at him, eyes wide and unblinking, as if they were waiting for him to understand something he hadn't yet. One morning he approached his best friend Pip, who had come over to help with some garden work. "Pip," Perwin asked, his voice shaking slightly, "do you remember when we were children? Do you remember our adventures in the woods, the trolls we fought, the riddles we solved?" Pip looked at him strangely. "Perwin, we've never done that. You've always been a bit of a dreamer, but you never left the Shire, you know that." Perwin's mind reeled. What did he mean? It was all so clear in his head. They had ventured into the deep forest, solved riddles that had saved them from certain doom, defeated creatures no one could imagine. But now even those memories were being stolen from him. The more he tried to make sense of it all, the more fragmented the world became. One moment he was standing on the banks of the Brandywine River, watching the river ripple in the twilight. The next he was in his kitchen, staring at an empty teacup. Was he losing time? Was time losing him? The voices grew louder and more urgent. "You've been asleep for so long, Perwin. Wake up. They've been keeping you here. You are more than this." That night, unable to shake the voices, Perwin wandered deep into the woods. He had to know the truth. He had to find the answers. As the trees grew denser and the moonlight barely pierced the thick canopy above, he saw a figure, tall, shadowed, cloaked in mystery. The figure smiled, its eyes gleaming with an unnatural light. "You finally come, Perwin," the figure said. "We've been waiting." Perwin's heart raced, his breath catching in his throat. "Who are you?" he demanded, though his voice quivered. "I am the keeper of memories," the figure replied. "I've been guiding you, helping you understand, but it's time for you to see it for yourself." The figure stepped aside, revealing a large mirror set against the ancient tree. Perwin's reflection stared back at him, but it was wrong. His face was older, worn, with hollow eyes. His hands were shaking, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He didn't look like himself at all. "No," Perwin whispered. "This isn't me. This isn't real." The figure nodded. "Exactly. You've been living in a dream. The Shire, the hobbits, the life you knew, they're all illusions. You've been trapped in your own mind, unable to accept the truth." Perwin stumbled back, his world crumbling around him. The voices, the figures, the memories, it was all a lie. His life was a product of his own delusion, a psychosis that had wrapped itself around him like a vine, choking the life from his mind. As the figure faded into the darkness, Perwin left alone, standing before the mirror, lost in the world of his own creation. In the days that followed, Perwin's neighbors noticed his strange behavior. He would sit in the same spot for hours, staring into nothingness, muttering under his breath. They tried to reach out to him, but he was beyond their reach now. The Shire continued on. Life went as usual, but for Perwin Bramblefoot there was no more peace, no more certainty. He had fallen into the abyss of his own mind, a place where the line between reality and delusion had become irreparably blurred. And in the quiet corners of the Shire, where the hills rolled endlessly into the distance, Perwin's psychosis remained, a silent whisper in the wind. This